Hello, good evening and welcome. Tonight on the David Ellis Report, we are discussing the future strategic vision for Britain's military and our defence industry, and managing the existential peril in a post-Cold War era. Joining me now is General Sir Richard Barrons to discuss these issues. Richard, welcome to the programme. So can we start? Thank you. So can we start initially with just how the threats globally have increased in their intensity and their volume, and just what kind of upgrades have we seen going on elsewhere, and where that leaves us here with our own armed forces and industry?
So I think this is a really important point. So everyone who is prominent in public life today, whether that's as a politician or an official, has grown up in the post-Cold War era, a world which we felt we had a good hand on, where there was a single US superpower, and the world was pretty much turning out in the way the West was inclined to support. And that's over now, as a number of very respectable commentators are setting out very clearly. The world going forward for the UK and our allies is going to be extraordinarily different. It will be dominated by a combination of three big strategic factors, and they are the indisputable rise of China, and in some way, over time, the relative decline of the US, even setting aside its inclinations to be more isolationist. So that's one factor. This is now going to be an Asian-dominated world. Secondly, for the first time in the history of mankind, we are running into the limits of our planet's ability to handle our demands, expectations, and abuse. And that is going to profoundly affect relations within states and between states. And thirdly, we're in the foothills of the digital age, the fourth industrial revolution, which is transforming how we live and work and play and how we fight. And those three things in combination mean the world is going to be much less certain, definitely not under our control, and much more potentially threatening. And for UK politicians, this means please stop worrying about doing discretionary things like maybe something in the Balkans or something in Iraq or something in Afghanistan. And please do start worrying about managing existential peril, where there'll be risks to our values, our security, and our prosperity, which you have to deal with because the stakes are so much higher. And I don't think that penny has really dropped very widely. The second thing that's just as important is the nature of war never changes. It's always a brutal and feral and dangerous and disappointing aspect of how mankind exists. But how war is fought changes all the time with thinking and technology. And the fact is, it has changed dramatically and is changing dramatically, and we haven't kept up. So the UK is being held at risk in ways which we're not on top of. And some of this gets quite an airing. So people talk about cyber, and they talk about social media manipulation, but they don't really capture how countries that are not on the best of terms with the UK, like Russia, for example, and perhaps Iran, are finding ways of applying all their levers of power short of military action generally to deliberately try and upset or destabilize or counter our interests. And this label hybrid conflict or hybrid confrontation exists every single day, and the UK is being done over, and we have not yet worked out how to respond to that. But just as important, the way military force is used, deployed, and developed is changing very quickly. So the UK Armed Forces can trace their current structure and equipment all the way back really to the First World War and the Second World War, you know, a tank, a warship, and a fast jet. And they've been dominant. But in the world we now live in, other forms of technology are dominating. In particular, the long-range precision missile could be nuclear, but just as well be conventional. So the things we have now, the things we're used to doing, have become very vulnerable. And so our ability to be offensive is much reduced. And crucially, We cannot protect this country from that sort of risk because we've not kept up. And
Yeah.
until we grasp this and drag ourselves out of the fumes of the post-Cold War era, then this country will be potentially at great risk.
Indeed so, and I think that that penny dropping with the MPs and the ministers is a crucial point you've raised there, and particularly it's the speed that these upgrades and adaptations have got to take place, because I think that the realisation, particularly from the many comments you've made in Defence Committee, with the advances that other countries have made in equipment, that it is not just a question of sledgehammer nukes that it was during the Cold War. We are dealing with a lot more kit, a lot more advanced weaponry, and that lag that we've now got in this country has got to be addressed. So in terms of upgrading our equipment, which we all accept now has to happen, but it's how quickly that happens. What are we looking at upgrading, and how do you envisage that taking place, and what kind of timescales do we really need for this to be effective?
Okay, so let me characterize it this way. In most of our heads, there's an idea of what war looks like. Set aside nuclear war. So when we think about conventional war, we think about mobilizing really large armed forces, army, navies, and air forces, and then deploying them to the country with whom we're having a dispute, which you invade or occupy or destroy until you get to some sort of decision. That, after all, is the model that we've seen in the Second World War and the Korean War, and is still current in other parts of the world. So we shouldn't think that it's completely gone. However, in the modern age, if you want to break a country like the UK, then you can now do it from range. So you would use a combination of long-range precision missiles targeted, I mean, not frankly at the armed forces because they're almost too small to find, but at our daily national lives.
Yes.
So power stations, telecoms, food distribution, uh, government offices, that kind of thing. You would supplement that with cyber attack, which is harder to do than people think, but could be pretty profound if we don't protect ourselves. And then, crucially, you do these physical things, and then by doing the sort of advanced social media manipulation that we've seen already in other settings,
Yep.
not only would you illustrate to people in this country that the things they rely on are vulnerable, you would be telling everybody all the time, every day, that unless they give way, this will keep happening. And this 21st century military strategy illustrates that we now live in an era where the world is essentially transparent from space. Missiles cross the world in 40 minutes, and with hypersonics they'll get quicker.
Yeah.
And technologies like robotics and autonomous capability are changing how military forces are constructed. So what we have to do is to recognise we need to recast how the UK and our allies' armed forces are constructed to catch up with this digital age. So that means investing in space surveillance and communication. Actually, we've made some strides towards that. It means absolutely resetting the air defense, air and missile defense of this country, which is virtually non-existent. So we can keep these missiles at bay. It means having our own missiles instead of other things, so we can hold other countries at risk if we need to, with our allies, such as in NATO. And then it means rebuilding armed forces away from what we have relied on, which are essentially manned platforms like ships, tanks, and aircraft,
Yep.
and building this mixture of manned, unmanned, and autonomous capability, which will survive on the modern battlefield. And the really disturbing thing is, in our own Ministry of Defence, these thoughts are all there. In our industry, we have people saying we can make this, and we know we have to do it. And what's absolutely missing is the political understanding, will, and resources to make this transformation happen over time. And until that happens, our politics are failing us.
They are indeed. I think that's those levers that have got to be thrown there from a ministerial level, a cabinet level, and the Prime Minister have got to be thrown quite rapidly. So just in terms of that strategic vision that we want for not just to upgrade, but to bring the military back into an arena where it's fit for purpose. The integrated review that's now taking place and the integrated operating concept that General Senator Carter is talking about. So obviously we're looking for this review to come out now, and there's a lot of ping-ponging going on in the press as to what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, and frankly, some of it sort of contradicting itself daily or weekly. What would you ideally be looking for to come out from the review, and then subsequently what the Cabinet and the Prime Minister has got to really do with this in order to get us where we need to be?
So when the review was launched, which, as you say, some time ago, it said all the right things about modernisation and transformation.
Yep.
And it's clearly been ambushed by the pandemic and the onset of the greatest recession for 300 years. And it also recognises that many people in this country don't really feel threatened. So our politics keeps pushing defence and security to the bottom of the list. So I think this integrated review at the minute is in real danger of being stillborn. But what it needs to do is pretty clear. And it needs to grasp three things. First of all, it needs to accept that we have to reset the resilience of this country against the sort of hard power that can threaten us, and against the sort of hybrid or soft power that is daily destabilizing our national life. We're perfectly capable of doing that. We're just not really organized for it. But resilience is very important.
Yeah.
So natural and man-made disaster and confrontation and conflict. Secondly, we need to build the capability in our government, in our public sector, for hybrid campaigning, not just event management like the Skripal incident,
right,
but build the ability in government to manage our politics, our diplomacy, our media, our social media, our money, our development, our cyber, our intelligence, all of those things in a fused way to prosecute UK influence around the world against the competitive benchmark set by countries like Russia and China and Iran and North Korea and indeed many others. And then the third thing we need to do is to recognize that our armed forces are running on the fumes of the post-Cold War era and need to be modernized and transformed. They have laid out what this means, but it will not happen until politics grasps the nettle and begins to make it happen, order it to happen. And there's a resourcing dilemma, but it's not huge. And that will do three really important things for the UK. First of all, it will make us safe and secure again over time. That really matters.
Yeah.
Secondly, because we could do this first and best in NATO, it will win us influence with our allies, particularly in the post-Brexit arena. And thirdly, if you're going to build armies, navies and air forces that are different, they're built around manned, unmanned and autonomous capability, UK industry can make this. So this has to be good for prosperity, because for the first time for a long time, UK industry at scale will be making things that other people around the world need to buy. And so this is good for export prosperity. And so if our politics gets this right, we can fix our defense, we can influence our friends, we can deter our enemies, and we can boost our industry. I mean, this, for me, is in the no-brainer territory.
Yeah, it's a quadruple. It's a win across the entire spectrum of society, isn't it? From all those investment opportunities, the jobs, the export opportunities that would come from it, and the revenue. Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of that resilience, because I think that's quite a relevant point, and the hardening. And obviously we've got this, this gambit at the moment with the long-range hypersonic missiles, and particularly if they wanted to run, some kind of EMP device on the end of it that would take out any nerve centres. I just want to bring in a paper that Admiral Sir James Burnell-Nugent put out a couple of years ago, and he was referring to the advances that Russia and China had made with their command and control systems and their structures. And he was calling for a national command and control structure that would bring all this into a much more efficient envelope. Is this going to factor within the integrated operating concept that Nick is talking about, and within the integrated review?
So it should and it could, but the bit that the MOD does is about military hard power, and the military does command and control pretty well.
Right.
The military know, for example, that they will reset their own command and control, the way headquarters work and relate to each other around a mixture of what they call the digital backbone, a combination of secure cloud, artificial intelligence, connectivity, and the advances of the single synthetic environment technology, which is a fantastic British evolution, which we should maintain first mover advantage in. So the military have kind of got this if they're unlocked. In terms of the rest of the government, the idea is there. A national command and control center, I think, is vital to how we do policy better, but also how we protect ourselves against natural and man-made disaster. And we need to recognize that, as you've described it, the capability that, for example, Russia has built over the last 10 years is deliberately designed to circumvent Russia's sense of our perceived military advantages. So not investing in huge tank fleets anymore, but in missiles that can reach the UK from Russia in 90 minutes. That's a cruise missile. And with a hypersonic missile in the future, that'll be about 8 minutes or less, possibly considerably less. So we need to recognize we need a command and control capability that can manage long-range precision missile threats, including nuclear and EMP nuclear, but mostly, I think, precision conventional missiles to which a nuclear response would not be appropriate. That can manage cyber confrontation and conflict, and can take charge of how the nation remains resilient in a genuine crisis, because we have let all of that go. We don't even really have continuity of government now. We don't have safe places for the government to go en masse in the way that was once normal. And this isn't just a matter for government. This is about politics leading the restoration of resilience at the level of our politics, national and regional and local, at the level of businesses and enterprises, and crucially, at the level of the citizen. And people like Elizabeth Braw, who until recently was leading this program at the Royal United Services Institute, have highlighted again and again how we could do quite simple things with our school leavers to make it clear to them how, as young citizens, they need to respond in the face of disaster. And these relatively cheap, relatively simple measures make society more resilient. And we are going to need that to find our way through the sort of difficult world that lies ahead.
Absolutely. Just to sort of sum up then, sort of in the conclusion of this, your message to backbench MPs, to press ministers, into government, and then on the constituency side, the message that you would put out to veterans that are concerned about this, as I know many of them are, that have reached out to me on these issues. So just in an all-encompassing final comments here, just to sort of bring this home to effectively what Ben Wallace and Stephen Lovegrove and Boris Johnson are going to have to be dealing with next year.
So I think the core messages are very clear. First of all, we need our politicians at all levels to understand how different the world is becoming and what that means for serious potential risk to the UK. This is not like their lived past. Secondly, they must understand that the current state of the UK's resilience, hybrid security, and military power is not appropriate for this world. Maybe it was fine once, it's not now. Filling in the holes or making the current thing bigger is not going to work. So thirdly, there is a way out of this, and most of it is about harnessing the application of digital age technology. So the path that the armed forces and the intelligence agencies have mapped out for their modernization and transformation is the right path, but it now needs politics to lead it. Without it, it'll never happen. And when we do this, and we have to do this, it will be good for our security. It will be good for our influence with our friends, and it will deter our enemies, and it will be fabulous for UK industry. We will be globally leading in new technology. But until politics grasps those things, none of this is going to happen, and the world will sweep past us and do us harm.
General Sir Richard Barrons, on that, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.